Today we're taking a look at Cod WW2 and I'm going to tell you why you were wrong about this game. Today I'm going to take a collective look at the game from multiplayer, campaign, and zombies and tell you why I believe this is one of the best Call of Duties that was ever made. Let's go ahead and get into it. Let's start with my least favorite aspect of the game, which is zombies. Now, the way I view zombies is if it's a hit, great. If it's a miss, it's not the reason that I bought the game. And so I have to admit that I was stoked when I heard the idea for zombies in this game would be a darker series. So I was almost expecting like a horror type experience in Call of Duty with zombies as the backdrop. And so I thought that was going to be a really cool idea. And although it was a darker experience, there were still some of the goofy arcade elements to it that made zombies fun in the past. It just didn't have the same feel. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still have hours and hours of fun playing with your friends. That is assuming that all of your friends bought the additional DLC to continue the zombie story. Unfortunately, that's the way it was back then. But I think with the denser maps and a little bit slower gameplay mechanics all in all, it just didn't quite pan out the way I was hoping. But to be an add-on in the game and something I see as a, just a hit or miss type of thing, I would still give it like a 6, maybe a 7 out of 10. It was a decent experience. When we start to get to some of the meat and potatoes of this game, and this is something that's often overlooked by myself as well, the campaign of Cod WW2 was a fantastic experience. I'm just going to go ahead and say it right now. Now, if you've never played this, I would recommend going back and playing it, especially if you own the game. It is worth your time. And again, that's not something that we typically say, or I typically say about Call of Duty campaigns. The biggest issue with campaign and Call of Duty is they typically feel like a one-man army. Shoot everything that moves, and you have a bunch of cutscenes that look really good, but there's no real story or depth to it, right? And one of the biggest things they did in this game is they built a basically band of brothers, right? Like with Saving Private Ryan type of inspiration to it as well. And you got to know and care about these characters, which is important. Now, this isn't the first time in a Call of Duty, campaign that we've ever cared about characters, Captain Price and Soap and other iconic characters throughout the series. And it's not the first time that they put an actually good campaign in the game, but from what I remember, this was the first really good campaign in a long time. You had some brief flashbacks that helped to break up the game. D-Day was as brutal as it's ever been in a Call of Duty experience or even a gaming experience that I've seen. You actually play as an undercover Nazi in one of these, and it is intense because you have to remember what your papers say, why you're there, and when you get questioned by one of the guards, if you don't have all of your facts in line, things don't go as planned.
Ja, das ist richtig. Wenn es Ihnen jetzt recht ist, kann ich Ihnen Ihre Reisepapiere zeigen.
Da kommen wir noch sicher. Herr Gruber sent you to arrange for my departure. I am flattered.
Yes. Herr Gruber wanted you back in Berlin.
Did he, Fräulein Schneider? And I thought it was Herr Spiegel that sent you.
And so that's a pretty cool element where typically you're just running and gunning. Now you're playing as an undercover Nazi to infiltrate, and I love the idea of that. Another thing they do well is as you're playing with your regiment, when you need backup from your tank squads, you actually transition to that tank squad. At one point, you're fighting 2 panzers at the same time. It's pretty intense. Another time you actually join your Air Force and guide your bombers so they can help secure your location. And then you transition back to the squad that you were with. There's another part where you actually find an entire family in a hotel. And so one of the little girls gets left behind. You go back to save her, and you run into Nazis that then follow you down to this basement where she is, and you have to try to sneak her out. Now, she whimpers way too much, and why our main character, Daniels, didn't just put his hand over her mouth and tell her to hush, I have no idea, but regardless, it's still a very tense experience. By the way, there's a ton of inaccuracies in this. If you are into World War II history like I am, then you will see them scattered throughout. I mean, I could probably make an entire video on the inaccuracies in this game. One of them is like super atrocious, and I have no idea how they messed this up, but you have Hill 400, which was in the Herkton Forest on the way to Battle of the Bulge. Well, they called it Hill 493 in the game. But this is a turning point in the game, and because they built up the characters enough to where you cared about them, you had this ongoing rift between Turner and Pearson, and then Turner ends up dying for your squad so y'all can get out of there. You actually care about him in that moment. It's not just a character they just kill off willy-nilly. You actually see these things play out. You fight side by side, and they build up that character and story arc enough to where you at least give a crap what happens whenever these things go down in the game. And by the way, by the time the Battle of the Bulge happens, I wish there was at some point you could have actually fought Pearson, because he was a real dick. And it turns out that a German y'all captured and then tried to help got the first lick in on Pearson. Sussman, which is your best friend, gets shot in the beginning of the game. He rejoins your squad, and then he gets captured and sent to a labor camp. They could have done a better job with the whole camp idea. They could have shown some of the real horrors inside of a concentration and labor camp. You know, again, they're trying to keep an M rating, and showing some of that stuff would have surely got them closer to the dreaded adult rating or whatever. But I just felt like they could have invoked a little bit more emotion with that. But overall, they did a good job. You know, and by the time you finish this campaign out, it is really one of the best, if not the best, COD campaign I have seriously ever played. It really is that good. With the inaccuracies and all, they really did a fantastic job. Stealth missions actually feel like stealth missions in the game, where you don't have to just go in running and gunning. You can, but there was times where I messed up on the stealth mission and I restarted the checkpoint just to go back and play it as a real stealth mission. It feels really good. The voice acting in this game is top notch, and the graphics look really good as well. Overall, I would give the campaign personally a 10 out of 10, and that's pretty freaking stellar when it comes to a Call of Duty campaign. Last thing we're going to talk about is multiplayer. And so this is the reason that I bought the game, and most people buy the game back then. This was before Blackout. This is before Warzone. So your multiplayer really has to shine. First thing we'll talk about is the headquarters. Cool idea, poorly executed. So you have an area where you can try out your score streaks. You have a shooting range. You have your quartermaster where you can get your orders for the day. You have a 1v1 arena. You have a gunsmith where you can upgrade and vote on the best camos of guns that people have made. It's honestly a really cool area. It's in third person. Makes you kind of feel like a Destiny vibe, except it's on Omaha Beach. One thing that cheapens that experience is the loot boxes. So you see people throwing them down and they come out of the sky. The supply drops, open up, and it's like, oh man, what did this guy get? Oh, I want that. And it's kind of a predatory approach to microtransactions. Okay, it's not all in your face. still there, and plus they had stupid little emotes that, again, just cheapen the experience. It's not Destiny, right? It's a World War II shooter, not some futuristic thing. But regardless, I like the idea of headquarters. They tried something new. Next, one of the biggest issues at launch was the lack of content, but the map design was good. Now, some of these maps you had to pay for, but all in all, I would say maps like Valkyrie, which is probably my favorite map in the game, is the Wolf Slayer in East Prussia, right? And so this was the most well-known attempted assassination on Hitler's life, right? He had several of them, okay? But there's bunkers, there's outdoor, slightly wooded areas. Of course, this whole place is in the middle of a forest, but, you have some buildings, you have a central building, the bunkers, you even see like the situation room where the bomb went off. It's all on fire, even though the table is still completely intact. Regardless, it's a really good design. As opposed to just 3-lane maps, I think they did a pretty decent job with this one. Now, you have like USS Texas, which is a 3-lane map and can be a spawn trap nightmare, but still a cool idea. You have Shipment 1944 and a variety of other decent maps. You also have like Sandbox, right? Where you're actually playing as a small army man, right? Like one of the little green army guys. And that's actually inside of the headquarters. So, everything is miniaturized, but everything on the outside of the map looks way bigger than what it actually is. It's kind of a cool thing. You have officers out of uniform throwing a baseball, and a nod to the Black Ops game that would follow this Call of Duty right here. You had Karatan, you had Aachen, you had the Chancellery building, you had Aachen, Stalingrad, and Point du Hoc, and the Ardennes Forest. And so it's a lot of the multiplayer maps. Probably most of the multiplayer maps, I believe, are behind a paywall. But they offer up a good variety and a lot of iconic places that were fought throughout the war that I personally had a lot of fun with. Again, there were a lot of 3-lane maps, but there was diversity there and a good selection of maps eventually. You had no disbanded lobbies, and you also had map voting, which is pretty cool as well. Now, the weapons were limited as well. You had variations of the weapons you could unlock, but all in all, they could have done a much better job of giving you a wider variety of weapons inside of the game. But another thing that you did have is war mode. You would build hedgehogs to stop the enemy tanks from advancing, and that's what it was. Is you had the attackers, you had the defenders. So think about Breakthrough in Battlefield, right? Except on a smaller, condensed scale. If you were defending, you would build up hedgehogs to stop tanks coming through. If you were attacking, you were trying to get those tanks from position to position, so that way you could eventually, take the bridge and be able to, finish the mission or whatever. But it was a really cool way of getting the boxy feel of Call of Duty maps out of the way and opening it up a little bit. The maps moved along and they changed along the way. Strategies changed along the way. And so war mode, and I'm not talking about ground war, by the way, but the war mode inside of World War II was a great concept, I thought. And I would have liked to see it implemented in future games. Unfortunately, it wasn't, but I liked the idea of it. I thought it was a pretty good experience. So if I had to rate the multiplayer at launch, it was like a 6 out of 10. Eventually, again, assuming you bought all the DLC, it became, like an 8.5 out of 10, right? It was a slower game. They did have, dolphin diving, which was pretty cool. But it was a slower game overall, a slower feeling game overall. But again, it was back to boots on the ground. And that was a nice change after 2 years of freaking exoskeletons. Overall, if I had to rate this game, I'd give it a solid 8 out of 10. Collectively, this is a pretty freaking awesome Call of Duty experience. If you like this video, you might like one of these other ones that I've already done. If you have any ideas for Call of Duty series or any other series just like this, if you want me to go over the things I hate about this game, I can do that as well. I can come up with a pretty big list of things I hate about this game as well. Just let me know down in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are on COD World War II, maybe in retrospect or maybe at the time when you were actually playing it. Love to hear those things down below. Big thanks to you guys. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.